Hello. We will start in a little while. So, let me first introduce myself. My name is Jan MACHÁČEK. I'm a journalist and chairman of the board of Havel's library, which is co-organizing this conference. And the name of this panel is the human rights situation in Eastern Europe. And first, let me introduce the panelists. I have to unfortunately apologize for Mr. Mustafa Džemilev for not being here. Finally, he had to stay in Strasbourg for very urgent matters. Apparently, Prague is not that important than at this moment as other cities which are also not coincidentally, capitals of European Union, not only of Council of Europe. So he's got some urgent political matters to discuss in Strasbourg. So we are really sorry. Mr. YEVHEN HLIBOVYTSKY is a member of the Nestor Group, a multidisciplinary expert group working on a long-term vision for Ukraine. He is also a founder of pro.mova, a think tank consultancy that researches values and the social, political and business implications of cultural changes. In his previous career, Mr. HLIBOVYTSKY was a journalist covering key political events in Ukraine and the region, and was active in a group of journalists combating censorship. In 2003, he was one of the founders of Ukraine's Channel 5, which became the voice of the Orange Revolution. He repeated this experience before the Euromaidan of 2013, becoming co-founder of Hromadske TV, an online broadcaster that played a crucial role during the winter events in Kiev. Mr. HLIBOVYTSKY had quit his media career in 2005, warning that a lack of reforms in the media sector would lead to censorship simply being replaced by corruption. Since then, he has worked at his think tank and provided training and expertise from the OSCE, Central Asia, the Caucasus, Ukraine and Moldova. Mr. HLIBOVYTSKY graduated in political science, graduated from the University of Kiev Mohyla Academy, and studied law at Lviv State University and philosophy in Bluffton University in Ohio, USA. He is based in Kiev of Ukraine. Mr. IVLIAN HAINDRAVA is one of the most high-profile politicians and political analysts in Georgia. He has been a member of the National Committee of the Republican Party of Georgia since 1992 and chaired the party from 1996 to 2000. From 1992 to 1995, he was a member of the Georgian parliament, where he was actively involved in its Committee of Abkhazian Affairs. At the same time, he was one of the key figures on the State Constitutional Commission of Georgia, helping to draft a new constitution introduced in 1995. After the Rose Revolution of 2003, Mr. HAINDRAVA was re-elected to parliament in 2004, serving until 2008. Mr. HAINDRAVA is a recognized expert on the politics of Georgia and South Caucasus. He headed the South Caucasus Studies Program at the Center for Development and Cooperation, Center for Pluralism from 1996 until 2008, and today leads the same program at the Republican Institute. He was a Reagan-Fesco Democracy Fellow at the International Forum for Democratic Studies, National Endowment for Democracy in Washington, D.C. This I don't have to read, so our third panelist is, who was so nice to have this role to replace Mr. Džemilev on the panel, is PETR KOLÁŘ. PETR KOLÁŘ was serving multiply as an ambassador of Czech Republic. He was an ambassador to Sweden, he was an ambassador to Ireland, and then he grew more important because he became the ambassador in the United States and ambassador in Russia. Currently he works like a consultant. So welcome on the panel, all of you. I would structure the panel that first I would ask the same question all the panelists, and then I would be asking a little more specific questions which are more connected to your backgrounds. First, let me ask this. Aren't you afraid that in current totally new geopolitical situation where there are all these like big things and big conflicts suddenly happening? There is a war in Ukraine, or currently a ceasefire, but certainly there is a war zone in eastern Ukraine. There is ISIS crisis in Syria. There are many other crises all around the globe. And so everyone is sort of focused on this big, very important global issue of the major security threats for the whole mankind, perhaps. So aren't you afraid that in this new picture, which certainly is going to stay here for quite some time, the so-called West or free world would grow less concerned of some activists, civic activists, dissidents in some countries which might be totalitarian, semi-totalitarian, authoritarian, but at least they are not dangerous to the outer world. Aren't you afraid that situation of dissidents in Azerbaijan, Abkhazia, Belarus, eastern Ukraine potentially, that the world would pay less and less attention to it, to them naturally, because well, we have these big troubles, big conflicts, so why to take care about people who are protesting against falsified elections in some semi-authoritarian country? So, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if this works well, if you can hear me, or I should take it. The question that you ask is actually quite a question, because this is the core to where we come. Do we actually have to take an action on behalf of the Western world? You know, maybe it's more convenient to just, fortify the border and say, okay, it's your problems. If you're in some kind of, let me rephrase the movie The Terminal, if you're in some kind of Krakozia, just it's your problems, if you have overthrows there or something like that. In a sense, the challenge of Ukraine, and I think there is a huge difference between the challenge of Ukraine and the challenge of ISIS, and I would actually not really put Ukraine and ISIS on the same line. I think the challenge of Ukraine is an internal challenge for the Western world, because what it allows to see how growing hedonism as a value in the Western world have injected the pain relief, which now prohibits the treatment to be delivered into the European system of governance that allows actually for the situations like we are currently experiencing in Czech Republic, which has incredible legacy of Václav Havel, to have a president who is claiming what he is claiming. And this is something where we should really admit to ourselves that democracy, human rights, basic freedoms are taken for granted. And yes, there are institutions that are following the development, for instance, of technologies, and we're watching that there are watchdogs that are watching that, for instance, the new regulations that come out of development of technologies do not threaten the privacy of people, or, we are in other ways following the progress. But actually, what we are risking right now is to have a fundamental breakdown inside the European Union. Look at Hungary. Look at the challenges with the reverse gas transit, with regards to Slovakia and the pressure that's there. Look at Greece. Look at Italy, and Berlusconi and his cozy relationships with Putin, and look how many countries are willing to trade security for freedom. And this doesn't come because of, particularly in all cases, because of bad governors, because of bad politicians. These bad politicians win political elections. Ukraine comes at a time when there can be an early wake-up call inside the EU that may actually put some of the forgotten values, forgotten issues back on the agenda. And this is important. Now, what happens is that Ukraine, and I'm trying not to speak as a Ukrainian here, and I'm trying not to be a professional Ukrainian here. It may happen that the metabolism inside the European body will be slow enough that Ukraine will die while making the case that freedom is important. Because institutionally, Ukraine is really a weak state. And the challenges come from an institutionally strong state. When we were talking about weak institutions in the former Soviet Union, we are talking about weak democratic institutions in the former Soviet Union. But let's not forget that autocratic institutions, while weak in Ukraine, are very strong in Russia. And Russia can really rely upon that. Russia is capable of concentrating up to $500 million annually for its information campaigns globally. Russia today is present in hotels. When I was staying in different hotels in Prague, and probably half the hotels, they had Russia Today. This is incredible. We are really in a point when we have to review where we are, and this is a wake-up call. Because otherwise, these gatherings like we have today may become more and more marginal and more with concern of historians. Because the real money, the real corporate inputs, the real policies, the real influence will be elsewhere. And yes, it's always easier to play zero-sum game than positive-sum game. It's always easier to play shadowy, striking shadowy deals than to have open policies and defend them even at the point when they are unpopular. But this is something that we have to come to. I am very sorry that the Crimean Tatars now will have to pay the price. They are the big victims. I'm very sorry that many Ukrainians will have to pay the price. They are the big victims. Let's look at the Moldovans. Let's look at the Abkhazians. Let's look at the Georgians. Let's look at the Armenians. Let's look at the Azerbaijanis. There are many people from, many countries that will have to pay the price because we have neglected one very basic principle. Freedom is like, as Madeleine Albright likes to say, it's like riding a bicycle. If you stop, you fall. So you have to keep on turning these pedals all the time. And if we don't do this, this is something that we will, we will have to do. We'll have to switch to helping refugees. We'll have to switch to have greater concerns, all the way to the Russians eventually saying that, hey, they have nuclear arms. Can we respond something to that?
Okay, thank you, but I won't leave you, so I have additional little question to you. It was very absolutely interesting speech, but I won't let you easy to avoid the question which was also about what do you expect that would happen to the attention of the West towards someone protesting against something in, say, Belarus or Abkhazia or Azerbaijan. So even though Ukraine is a completely different conflict than ISIS, I didn't put it together, but it's a major crisis. And through this major crisis, we will perhaps stop paying attention to some countries which are totalitarian, authoritarian, but stable and not threatening to the outer world. So what's your opinion on it?
Well, I have a daughter of a difficult age, and sometimes we have difficult conversations. And one of them is about making mistakes in life. And it's not a problem to make a mistake, it's a problem to repeat a mistake. I can remind of 1956, when Hungarians were fighting for their freedom. And the Suez crisis happened in a very inconvenient time. And it took Hungary off the first pages of the newspapers. Well, that should have actually taught us a lesson, that something else should not overshadow something important. But we see repeatedly over decades that we have not learned that lesson. And I understand that the issue, for instance, of ISIS is driving us away from the issue here, because ISIS is for a European person, ISIS is a very simple thing. You know, we are here, they are there. You know, we're the good ones, they are the bad ones. So it's a very black and white picture. You know, with regard to Ukraine, it's way more sophisticated, because we have to sacrifice something. For instance, a lot of Czechs would have to sacrifice, for instance, their jobs that may be lost if Czech-Russian relations worsen. They would have to sacrifice part of their financial security, because, part of GDP can be lost if, there's significant worsening. Yeah. So, my opinion is that we have not learned the lessons, and this is why we are going back. And Václav Havel, who spent time in prison, his story is being repeated now a number of times, and it could have been avoided in Belarus, in Azerbaijan, elsewhere, but we're just not pushing hard enough.
Okay, thank you. Now you really responded what I was asking about. So now the same question for Mr. HAINDRAVA.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to cordially thank organizers for inviting me here. It's really a great honor to participate in the event named after Václav Havel. I can confess that there were two persons in my life who somehow triggered my interest towards such issues as freedoms, liberties, human dignity, and so on. The first one was my own father, and the second one was Václav Havel, you see. And Prague Spring of 1968, I was 17 years old, was actually the first political shock I experienced, and it somehow determined my future life. Well, my task is really hard here, because I have to somehow present to you the 25 years long period in Georgia, which I have to press in 10 minutes. It means that I have less than a half minute for whole year, but I will try my best, and if pan moderator does not interrupt or even stop me, I will try my best. So I think it's really important to have an impression what is present-day Georgia and how it moved to this situation. And I would say that the period between 1989-2004 in Georgia may be divided into three main stages. The first one, 1989-94, includes the first multi-party elections and peaceful removal of communists from the power, referendum and declaration of independence, followed by the first presidential elections. At the same time, it was the period of quasi-military coup and overthrow of the first president, ethno-political conflicts, which led to the loss of the control over breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and hardships of thousands of IDPs and refugees, elements of civil war, the rise of lawlessness and uncontrolled paramilitary groups, collapse of economy, hyperinflation, constitutional and legal mess, resulting in actually utter chaos throughout the country. The second stage, 95-2003, may be divided into two sub-stages. In 95, a new constitution was adopted in Georgia. national currency, lari, introduced, paramilitary groups were eliminated, the legislative framework for liberal reforms as well as some democratic institutions such as Constitutional Court and Office of Ombudsman were established. The mid and late 90s were also notable for, I would say, institutionalization of Western vector in Georgian foreign policy. Georgia became the first South Caucasus state to achieve membership in Council of Europe and the World Trade Organization, refused to affiliate itself with Russia-led military bloc, Organization of Collective Security Treaty, achieving instead the agreement on withdrawal of Russian troops, Russian military bases and border guards from Georgian territory. The relations with NATO expanded and deepened, giving way to a US-sponsored train and equip program for Georgian army. The contract on construction of oil pipeline Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan was signed, attracting Western business interest towards the country. The apotheosis of this course was reflected in Georgia's will to join NATO, officially declared by President Shevardnadze here in Prague during 2002 summit of the Alliance. But life in Georgia was still far beyond from Western standards. By the end of the 20th century, just two words were enough to describe the internal situation: corruption and stagnation. No surprise then that it resulted in the dramatic change of power in the fall of 2003, the event known as a Rose Revolution. And here starts this third and probably the most interesting stage of Georgian statehood, which may be defined as authoritarian modernization. And it also can be divided into two sub-stages. The first one, that mainly concurs with the first presidential term of Mikhail Saakashvili, ran under the perception of rapid modernization of the country, though neglect of democratic procedures could have been observed from the very beginning of that process. Still, the fight against corruption, as well as organized crime, was a real breakthrough. The administrative reform, including police, was also a success. The situation improved significantly in the fiscal sphere, and instead of pockets of corrupted bureaucracy, the taxes were redirected to the state budget. Implementation of some large-scale infrastructural projects improved the appearance of the country. The pro-Western trend in Georgian foreign policy became not just stronger, but I would say an aggressive. But oppression of opposition, media and civil sector, and almost no rise in the living standards of the majority of population resulted in mass protests in November 2007. The response of the authorities was inadequate. Violent police crackdown on peaceful demonstrations, leaving up to 500 protesters injured, storming by armed members of security agencies of the independent TV channel and taking it off the air, declaring a 15-day-long state of emergency. It was a clear signal that the life in Georgia was rather different from the picture Saakashvili successfully painted for the West. In January 2008, in early presidential elections, only obvious falsification provided Saakashvili with the victory in the first round. Parliamentary elections in May did not produce any improvement from the point of view of political pluralism and civil liberties. Then August came, bringing disastrous war with Russia. Since then, the only aim of Saakashvili was to maintain power at any cost, while the reformist drive and creativity of his team somehow evaporated. During his second presidential term, Georgia experienced less and less modernization and more authoritarianism. Freedom House annual country reports clearly demonstrate that in the years 2003 to 2012, democratic score of Georgia did not progress at all, which means that this was just wasted time from the point of view of developing democracy. In the fall of 2012, when Saakashvili's party lost the parliamentary elections, Georgia entered the next stage of post-Soviet existence, though it is premature so far to define what is it about as a whole, but I can share with you some preliminary observations. Georgia maintains pro-Western course. In June it signed association agreement with the EU, essential part of which is deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. Georgia's NATO aspirations remain as strong as usually, and during September Wales summit, a package of special assistance to Georgia was approved by the alliance. At the same time, mutually aggressive rhetoric with Russia is left to past, and some trade and humanitarian contacts have been restored. Internal situation is more complicated. After 2012 parliamentary elections, Georgia experienced such a novelty as cohabitation is. Majority in the parliament as well as the cabinet of ministers belongs to the ruling coalition, while Mr. Saakashvili, who declared himself oppositioner, remained in the office of the president for another year. The country found itself in a situation of collision between president, with still very wide competences on one hand, and both representative and executive branches on the other. After presidential elections held in October of last year, when Saakashvili's second term expired and the candidate of the ruling coalition predictably won the elections with 62% of votes, it was expected that the situation would change to much more coordinated work of two institutions, President and the Cabinet, especially taking into consideration that along with presidential elections, a new version of Constitution came in force. Georgia has made significant step, though incomplete step, from presidential model towards parliamentary republic model, finding itself somehow in between, close to so-called mixed model. So the shortcomings of the new version of Georgian constitution on one hand, and personal antagonism between newly elected president and the newly appointed prime minister have led to another collision between these two institutions, which negatively affects decision-making process in Georgia and Georgia's international image as well. Besides that, the new government lacks vision and reformist spirit in some spheres of social, and economic life, that causes certain public disappointment. Still, there are important positives, some positives at least in Georgia. Peaceful change of power through ballot boxes that took place through parliamentary and presidential elections. The period of cohabitation produced no major losses, but provided new and important political experience. Coalition of parties in power is also novelty and bringing also a valuable political experience to the country. Opposition in the parliament is not only vocal but capable of directly affect constitutional process. Country moves away from authoritarianism. Media is as free as never before. And the process of demythologization of strong leader is going on, and the notion started to realize that it is better to rely on institutions, rule of law, checks and balances, rather than on charismatic leader. It may be hoped that with consolidated and complex assistance from the West, Georgia will continue its transformation into European-style country, successfully fulfilling a major goal, integration in Euro-Atlantic structures. The main challenge here comes from the north. Having own experience of Russian aggression in 2008, which was not paid adequate attention and reaction from the West, witnessing the events in Ukraine, there is no ground for calm indeed. The dominant question among Georgian experts today is as following. Are we the next target? Are we indeed? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your report. But Now I would like to ask PETR KOLÁŘ to going back to responding to the question.
Okay, thank you. It works. Thank you very much once again for reminding me. Sometimes it's nice to be even the substitute. So I'm really grateful I could be with you today. My answer to your question is yes, I'm afraid that because of big conflicts and big crises, we sometimes can ignore and forget what's really essential for democracy and for our values we need to preserve and fight for. Unfortunately, it's the lesson learned from the history that if evil is not stopped in the beginning, its appetite is growing, and finally we are faced with a bigger problem that we could have if we were active in the beginning. It's not only the lesson of this country and this nation. We can go back to the recent history. Georgia was mentioned here. Now we see Ukraine. Simply, if we look at the current Russian appetites, we see that if, for example, in Bucharest Summit 2008, we offered those two countries membership in NATO, maybe in Moscow they would be furious, but they would somehow they would have to accept it. We refused them. Then shortly after that summit, invasion of Russian troops to Georgia happened, and then after some time of big words from Western politicians, actually nothing happened. South Ossetia and Abkhazia is still separated physically, not legally because we don't recognize it, but still separated from Georgia. And now we see the situation in Ukraine. So it's my message is that we need to take it seriously. Big crises and big conflicts shouldn't lead us to neglect some smaller conflicts because they are not maybe for us in the moment so existential. And we can say, well, it's so far away from here in the countries where we don't know so much, as Mr. Chamberlain, I'm paraphrasing Mr. Chamberlain in 1938, when he said something similar about Czechoslovakia. So it's everything is close to us in this globalized world, in this small world. We could be affected by all those crises, and we are not obliged to neglect them and ignore them. The worst enemy of democracy and freedom is ignorance and selfishness. I'm afraid that, well, we in Europe and in Euro-Atlantic world more and more speak about sustainable growth, about economic crisis, financial crisis, but we don't speak properly and openly and loudly about roots of our system, of our values, of our free market, of our capitalism, of our rule of law. What is the free citizen who is able to protest and who is allowed to protest if he doesn't like something, who is able to express his views. And it's our essential interest to have free citizens, responsible citizens in other countries as well. Democratic countries, free countries, where their society is based on liberal values and rule of law, usually don't fight with each other. If today's Russia would be closer to our principles, I'm sure that the situations we are faced with would not occur. So yes, I'm afraid that, well, continuously and repeatedly we will be neglecting some conflicts and rules and human rights in countries which are a bit far away from us, as we think. because of our big tasks, and then we could be surprised. It could be like a boomerang, and it will strike back. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Now again one specific question for Mr. Hlibovitsky, or actually two, so I will start with one. So what do you think about human rights in a war zone, in an armed conflict, within the armed conflict? Because if you are in an armed conflict in a war, people wish most that the people stop dying, and etc., etc. So how is it with human rights in the war zone?
Well, the answer is simple. It's terrible. Let's go and try to explain how it all happens. The war zone in Ukraine is restricted to the places where the majority of population maintain their very strong Soviet identity. So these are the places where the Soviet Union has succeeded in its social genetic experiment of creating the Soviet person. What does it mean? That means that on the grassroots there is very little ability to take responsible decisions. That leads to tremendous inequality inside the society. And because this inequality is very sustainable, because it's supported by autocratic institutions, very few have access to vast resources, and the majority has no rights. Any governance is unaccountable. What in effect you have is you have big industrial cities where people have very little choice in terms of their labor market. You know, the labor market doesn't give them choices of where they have to work. And if, for instance, the industry runs out of business, you have huge cities that have tens or hundreds of thousands of people that have no social perspective. They really enjoy the war right now because having the gun in one's hand for someone who was unemployed for 5 or 7 or 10 years is a great advantage. A person can have incredible perks that the war brings to that person. For instance, you can shoot someone you don't like. You can take anyone's property that you want. You can actually install yourself into a new car that you took from someone under the gunpoint that you couldn't have never purchased. So in a sense, the war became the social lift for those people who never had access to social lifts. Would they respect someone else's right? No. Would any system of governance that they set up respect human rights? No. The threat is very imminent to anyone who has strong opinions. If you practice your opinions, you will end up somewhere in a basement tied to the wall, you know. And that means that what happened basically in the east of Ukraine right now is a cleansing, but not according to ethnic basis or religious basis, something that we're used to, for instance, in the Balkans, but based on the ability of person to think critically. If you can have your opinion that you can defend with arguments, you are dangerous to that system. So what we have is we have hundreds of thousands of people who fled east of Ukraine. They are mostly in Ukraine. Some of them went to Russia. Most of them went to Ukraine. And in fact, what we have is we have an enclave which is so Soviet that it is so Soviet to the extent that Russia itself is not. So, for instance, making further the Balkan comparison, Serbia is on the path to some kind of modernization, some kind of transition, but Srpska Krajina is not. Russia will be modernizing itself eventually, but Donbass probably will not. The east of Ukraine probably will not, because what it has created a reservoir where you have no pluralism, where you have no human rights, where you have no value of life, where you have little access to basic services that we're all entitled to and that we take for granted. So in a sense, situation is very bad. It's a different situation in Crimea, which is not militarily taken over. Russia is trying to use its own institutions, its own very strange laws and its own very strange rule of law and court system to subject the Crimean society to the Russian rules. And the first ones that they have problem with are Crimean Tatars, who simply do not comply. And eventually that means that pretty much some of the Russian government figures will have idea of let's do something with those Crimean Tatars that don't comply. And this is a dangerous way of thought, and some of the policies are implemented already. For instance, Crimean Tatars were stripped of the office for the Majlis leaders, both Mustafa Dzhemiliev and Refat Chubarov were not allowed into Crimea. And, you know, we see persecutions of the Crimean Tatar activists. We see that on a daily basis. And so, you know, I don't know if that answers the question with the human rights, but I would say, you know, they're dire straits.
Okay, thank you very much. You actually responded already my second question, which was in the pipeline. So it was a question about what you think about the future of Crimean Tatars. So I don't have to ask the second question. So I will have a specific question for PETR KOLÁŘ, since he was in Moscow like an ambassador, obviously, but definitely he knows also something about Russian-Belarusian relationships. Since we should also mention the situation in Belarus, and it's actually, isn't it paradoxical that in last few weeks Belarus was actually playing a sort of role of a moderator of the Ukrainian conflict between Ukraine, Moscow, and the West, or Germany, or European Union, etc. In first round Germany, second round European Union. So what do you think is the first future of where is Belarus would be heading out of this? Now it looks like a stable, peaceful country which is even able to provide its capital for productive, peaceful talks. And what are the Putin's intention as far as Belarus is concerned? What do you think?
Well, in diplomatic life, you always need a moderator if you have two sides who don't want to talk to each other normally, and sometimes even such obscure regimes like we have in Belarus are profiting from that. So they suddenly appeared on the stage like the moderator, and I'm sure that President of Belarus very much enjoyed that. Suddenly he was the peacemaker. Well, the question is if we should accept it. I mean, we as a Euro-Atlantic space, if we should accept this role, I would say that in situations like that you need to try everything possible until the last possibility, until the last chance. You need to negotiate, you need to look for some ways which could calm down the tragic fighting and killing of people. I am afraid that for Mr. Lukashenko, actually it doesn't mean so much, I think, for his position in eyes of Mr. Putin. Lukashenko is still perceived as a kind of the representative of the buffer zone between European Union, between NATO and Russia. the country which could be by Putin squeezed any time, and I'm afraid that there will be no real fighting against Russians like we can see in Ukraine. Belarusian identity, it's a bit different than in Russia, thanks to Mr. Lukashenko as well. Those people whom we like in Belarus, our friends who are freedom fighters, who are human rights activists, they are, I'm afraid, in real minority. So they can say their word about it. I am not here to pretend that I'm the expert about Belarus. So I can say that for me this role was just kind of the shining moment for Mr. Lukashenko, nothing more, nothing less. He suddenly was used by both sides in his country as a platform to try to find out some solution. And that's all, nothing more important.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to ask Mr. Haindrava, now you were speaking mainly about Georgia, but could you tell us a little bit about the regions like about Russian occupied or puppet government, pro-Putin puppet government in regions like Ossetia and Abkhazia, because these are absolutely forgotten corners of the world as far as human rights situation is concerned. So could you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Okay, thank you. But first, short comment regarding this Islamic State and the Ukraine issue. Well, I also have the feeling that somehow this issue of Islamic State overshadows the developments and events on the in Ukraine. Well, for Georgia, it's not at all the same what's happening on the southern border of Turkey, because our southern border is Turkish north border, and then we have North Caucasus to the north, and hundreds, if not thousands, of residents of North Caucasus are fighting in the ranks of this Islamic State. So this is a real threat and real challenge for Georgia as well. This is why we joined the coalition and so on. But clearly, the issue of Islamic State is the issue of the world order. The issue of Ukraine is the issue of European order. It's in the very center, in the middle of the Europe. And it should remain in the very middle and in the very center of European policy. And when I recall what Ambassador mentioned, 2008 and so on, the business as usual with Russia started half a year after their aggression to Georgia. And I don't want this thing to repeat regarding Ukraine. The business as usual should not start until we have what we have in Donetsk and Luhansk. Actually, everybody forgot about Crimea already, unfortunately. Regarding this, I strongly agree with YEVHEN's observation, because Transnistria, now Luhansk and Donetsk, Abkhazia and South Ossetia are the islands of the former Soviet Union with Soviet mentality, Soviet way of living and Soviet way of thinking. Even to the more degree compared with Russia itself, not taking into account some deep provincial areas of Russia. And freezing the situation in Donetsk and Luhansk will produce another so-called frozen conflict like Transnistria, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which may be defrosed any moment, and we know who and how may defroze these conflicts. So when I actually finished my presentation with the words, are we the next target? I don't know. It may be Georgia, it may be Moldova, it may be Ukraine as well. But I would like to stress that this all is about Europe. This is not about some remote, difficult, hard territories with mixed identities and so on. This is about the countries with strong European identities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now again to Mr. Hlibovytsky, I saw it in your CV that you were interested in the freedom of the press and corruption, but it's actually an interesting question. What about human rights and corruption? In human rights in a completely corrupted, weak state, what's your take on this?
Okay, well, this is something that I will have an hour-and-a-half presentation tonight in Prague. An hour-and-a-half long. I'll try to keep it to several seconds. Corruption culturally in Ukraine and many other countries is a bit different from what we usually perceive it. It comes from perception of rules that are not owned by the people. When people do not feel that they own the rules, they don't feel that these rules are somehow accountable. And because they don't feel that these rules are accountable, these rules in themselves are a threat to well-being of the people. So people use corruption as a mean to make unfair rules or unfairly perceived or rules perceived as unfair more fair. So in a sense, corruption is a defense mechanism inside the society against foreign rules. Foreign not in the sense that they come from somewhere else, but in the sense that they are strange. And in more authoritarian systems, we see that corruption is a mean of extortion, which is different. In that sense, anti-corruption measures, I would say conventional anti-corruption measures in Ukraine failed for very obvious reasons. You cannot persuade the Ukrainian that corruption is bad until you install the rule of law, which will provide security. So first security, then anti-corruption mechanisms. And this is something which is very basic and very, very important for Ukraine. But you see, the problem is Ukraine is perceived as a deviation of Russia. Ukraine is perceived as an Eastern European country, which is very similar to Russia. They even speak similar language to Russian. So it's obvious that they are similar. In a sense, Russia and Ukraine culturally live on different planets. Russia is a very centralized, very hierarchical society where you have someone at the top taking all the major decisions. Ukraine is a very horizontal society that actually doesn't have the concepts of hierarchy. You know, it doesn't really have the concept of leadership inside its culture. And in a sense, it represents more the political discourse of Southern Europe, like Greece, like south of Italy. So in Ukraine, final decisions are taken at grassroots, not at the top. This is why people on Maidan matter in Ukraine, and this is why someone in Kremlin matters in Russia. That makes it very different. And the nature of corruption, of course, will be different, because in Ukraine, corruption will be a tool of person to protect itself against the unfair rules, and in Russia it will be a mean of extortion. And that makes the way to counter corruption completely different in both systems. But we actually have very little, we in the West, we have very little ability, though we have the capacity for that, but we have not employed it to look inside these societies to understand that. We have all the fancy universities, incredible programs, we have great think tanks, but we actually never ask them to try to understand what's going on. And the result of that is the mess that we see on the pages of the newspapers, very inaccurate reporting. We don't really understand what's going on. And as a result, the voter, for instance, in Czech Republic or in Spain or somewhere else doesn't really understand why the hell do we need to understand that Ukraine, let them fight there, do whatever there, let's issue them less visas and we will be safe here. And this is a dead wrong response.
Thank you. I think it was it is actually a fascinating topic in itself, so I understand that you are professionally also interested in it. So since probably everyone expects that we will also touch some current issues, I would like PETR Kolář now, I would like to ask him if we look in the current, in the history, like a few years back, it took, there was Russian intrusion to Abkhazia, then there was a break, and there was a few years break, and there was takeover of Crimea. Perhaps Putin really didn't intend to take over eastern Ukraine, we don't know. Some people think that now, since the whole thing, the whole show, whole business of war is and taking over of Crimea is very expensive for Russia. So people think that he's not gonna go after next target very soon. That we will once again have few years break again to recover, and then he would attack another target. And other people believe, in Czech we say s jídlem roste chuť, že these breaks can become very shorter and shorter. So what do you think about this, and what do you expect, what might be the next target, if there is some, and do you expect that Putin would ever start to play with the Baltic states, which are members of NATO at some point, but have very strong Russian minorities?
Well, it very much depends up to us. As I said in my previous remarks, if we don't stop the evil in the beginning, the appetite of the evil is growing. So we have to prove, first of all, our ability to protect ourselves, to protect our territory, to protect our values and our style of life. We need to prove our ability to sacrifice something. We can't speak only about 750 jobs we are going to lose because of the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, and because of the sanctions. We have to understand that even the medical doctor would tell you that small surgery, which could protect your life, is better if it's painful, even if it's painful, and if you need to lose your finger, it's better than to die in very bad conditions. So we have to be preventive. It's a game between us and him now. I know a lot of very nice Russians, a lot of very gentle Russian intellectuals who are really suffering, not only physically but mentally, because they can't prevent their own leader to do things which are in their eyes very bad. But now we have to really stand firm, in the West, and as much possible united. And if we don't prove this ability to protect ourselves, then it could happen that Mr. Putin will try more and more. I don't think that he is really such a fanatic or stupid idiot like some people are trying to compare him with Hitler and so on. I don't think so. He is just, the little shorty who had a big He had a big ideas about restoration of Russian Imperium. He read a lot of historical books, and he wants to be perceived as a Tsar, the Tsar the Builder. He wants to expand his territory to at least the former borders of the former Soviet Union. For him, the biggest tragedy of the 20th century was not the World War II, but the collapse of the Soviet Union. He said it. I'm almost quoting what he said. So he's restoring his own imperium. Now he is, floating on the wave of popularity, incredible popularity he had now. About 80% of Russians are applauding to what he's doing. But we know that in history, nothing is granted forever. And then I believe that his popularity and his appetite could be limited if Russians would understand that this is nothing good for them. It's actually not bringing so many good things like they maybe believe now in this moment. They got sober. They got sober after some time. It doesn't look like that now, but please believe me, it is not forever. So I think that we will not be faced with the invasion of Baltic states if we can prove that we are ready to protect them. I mean, as members of NATO, we need to be united, and as members of European Union as well. So it's, Jan, to your question, it's very much up to us. His appetite is one thing. Our position and our firm response to that is, I believe, even more important.
Thank you very much. And other panelists also want to react briefly on it, Mr.
I would fully complement what you just said. It's fully in the hands of the West to act and proact here. There are certain assumptions that are now proven to be wrong. Is that first, that you can deal with dangerous dictatorships business-wise like nothing happens. And then politically, it's a different issue. No, it's not. So I think going out of box and thinking of something like a dictatorship trade tax is a good idea. Second thing is that Putin created conditions under which it's very clear the basis for partnership between Ukraine and the West. Because some of the questions that the West is asking without having an answer, Ukraine has a very clear answer to. Because of our experience of living together, we can interpret the actions in Russia much faster and much better. For instance, the things that many people here in the West ask, for instance, what are Putin's intentions? We understand it. Oh, we know it for sure. We understand that Putin's intention is actually to have the set of rules that is comfortable for him expand as far as he can. And that means ruining the European Union and ruining the world order. And that means that we have to cure not Putin, because Putin, he will die one day. He will, something will happen, maybe an overthrow, we don't know. But the problem is, what can recreate Putins like that? And that is the Russian imperialism, which is very similarly to German Nazism, is creating a lot of problems. While Germany was defeated in the war, and no one was asking Germany whether it wants to go through denazification or not, that was a condition. Well, with Russia, it's going to be much more difficult because Nuremberg is not anywhere close. We don't see conditions for the trial. Many people are joking that for Putin, the way out is through Hague, but it doesn't really look realistic. And so, how can we actually help the Russians to sober up? And that will take decades, because, for instance, one of the things that we will learn is that, at least in humanities, the education in Russia is something that is contributing to problem. And if you want to fix education, that's going to take 10, 15, 20, 30, 35, 40 years. That's a long-term project. And then the question is the West capable to dedicate resources and policies that would last 20, 30, 40 years? And this is incredibly difficult. You know, we cannot come out, you know, with simple reforms that last 2 or 3 years, and we're talking about 30, 40. Well, let me give you the alternative. What's going to happen? There are two expenditures that are rising. One is healthcare cost, the other is energy cost. These two expenditures are killing any European budget. There's going to be a third one called security. Many countries, including the Czech Republic and Slovakia, have chosen not to follow the NATO recommended 2% of GDP expenditures, which actually is the reason why Putin is not afraid of NATO, because he knows that NATO cannot put real policies, real troops behind the words. Because Putin knows exactly that if he attacks Estonia, which he actually did on the day when Barack Obama was there delivering his speech, you know, they kidnapped a Estonian security officer, there will be no response. Because there is no capacity for that response. Because countries like, you know, many Eastern European countries that now feel safe decide that they want to spend, you know, 0.5%, 1% of GDP on security, then it's okay. So, you know, the question is whether we pay a bit more right now and continue paying a bit more, or we will have exponential rise of cost, which will actually make the living much worse and face tremendous risks. So for every European right now, the question is not whether to pay more or not. The question is whether to pay more and have a result that will come further away, or to pay a little bit more and gamble. And I wouldn't gamble if I were you.
Okay, thank you. Now Mr. Haindrava wanted to comment on it.
Thank you. I would also call everybody to take Putin seriously. Ambassador recalled his saying that the disintegration of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. What did Mr. Putin start his presidency? He started with the restoration of Soviet anthem. And it was not only, it was symbolic, but it was not only a symbolic step. I hope many of us remember Putin's Munich speech where he said that Russia will follow only her own interests in the international policy, and it does. After solution on Kosovo independence, Putin said that Russia has a symmetric response, and the response followed in 2008 against Georgia. Presenting his Eurasian project, Putin said that this project is a milestone for all countries of former Soviet Union, for all countries of post-Soviet Union, you see, including Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova. I don't know, did he mean Baltic states as well, but this is what he said. Well, we may hope and think, and me personally, I am even sure that strategically Putin's way and Putin's project are the game he is unable to win. He will lose this game. But we, Georgians, Ukrainians, Moldovans, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, we have to survive before he loses this game, you see. So again, I strongly agree with what YEVHEN had said, and Mr. Ambassador also mentioned. You see, European states have not to be very selfish. They have to remember their own experience, starting, by the way, with Munich in 1938.
Okay, thank you very much. So now I would like to open it to a few questions from the audience, and I would also like to ask you to introduce yourself first, and then tell us which panelists you are aiming your question at. So who wants to ask something? Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Adam Tivoniak. I'd like to have a question on Mr. Hlibovytsky when he said that the fact that we know very little or we don't try much to understand foreign territories or countries and conflicts and the states of freedom in territories apart from Europe lead to the situation that people here tend to think, okay, it's far away, we are safe here. I'd like to know Mr. Hlibovytsky's opinion on how can we understand these territories better. I don't mean only the people like here in this gathering, but in the whole society, and how can we make better or better informed decisions on this. Thank you.
Well, it's simple and not simple at the same time. I would say through expanding the amount of exchange in all spheres. Speaking of, for instance, educational exchange, we had very little research done by Western institutions in the former Soviet Union. Especially, for instance, the sector that I'm in, I can say that there was no reliable cultural research data, along with, done according to Western methodologies in countries like Ukraine until probably late last decade. This is when only we started getting the data. You see, we are making the assumptions that are based purely on institutional research, which is incredibly dangerous because institutionally Turkmenistan and Estonia, after the collapse of Soviet Union, were like twin brothers. It's the culture which makes them so different. But we were dealing with average figures, not with the particular figures. Science and analysis. So research facilities, science and analysis. This is something that we haven't seen much. Second thing, really understanding the business. A great deal of exchange of business that we've seen between the West and the East was the Western businessmen who were enjoying in the East that they could do practices that they would be punished for at home. Those who really enjoyed corruption and those who really enjoyed lack of law in Russia, in Ukraine, in other countries were benefiting. We have never really been exposed to the business. Same thing with tourist exchange. Same thing with visa policies. It's amazing that, for instance, the visa policies that countries like Czech Republic or any other Schengen countries are putting up actually allow the corrupt ones to get through, but are keeping away the civil activists, the journalists, actually those that you want in. And so I would say what it created a number of glass walls, these policies, that do not allow the light or the visions to penetrate and to understand each other. And a lot of things are being done, for instance, in Czech Republic. I can only compliment, for instance, the incredibly professional staff of Czech Republic in the Czech embassy in Kiev. Fantastic. People speak languages, they understand the context, but you cannot. This is one positive case. And if you go and take it across other institutions, it just doesn't scale. So actually. As I said, the capacity is here, but the focus is not. We should put understanding of Ukraine, Russia, the Caucasus, Central Asia, Turkey, the Middle East on the radars and start looking there.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Kamil Ovin speaking. My question goes to Mr. Macháček, actually Mr. Kolář.
I am a moderator, so just Mr. Kolář.
Okay, to Mr. Kolář. Respectable U.S. magazine Time International call current situation Cold War #2. As we know, Cold War #1 took about 45 or 44 years and was won by great leaders as U.S. President Ronald Reagan and United Kingdom Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and leader of the NATO Manfred Werner and great political strategists as George Kennan or Zbigniew Brzezinski. Well, my question is, do we have now such leaders of states or actually political strategists who are capable to solve this situation with Putin's Russia? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this question. I'm by my nature optimist, so I still believe that we have leaders who could be real leaders and statesmen, or, well, I should be gender equal, so state women, state persons who would lead us in right direction. Unfortunately, I don't see them much in our part of Europe. I mean, in Central Europe. But recent elections in Slovakia were quite encouraging. I mean, presidential elections in Slovakia. I'm very pleased to see that former Prime Minister, actually maybe still the Prime Minister, no, he resigned already, of Poland, Tusk is now the President of European Union. I have to say that I always admired very special but effective style of Radek Sikorski. And one of my favorites, if not the favorite politicians in Europe is Madam Angela Merkel. Well, I can only dream about the combination of Merkel and Gauck, what they have in Germany now. In our situation, but well, still we have them in Europe. Of course, you know, it's very hard to be a leader who prevent evil, to be too expansionistic, and someone who is based, who bases his arguments on the principles. If you are well, under pressure of unions and some business communities who are telling you, well, you are elected, so we are the voters as well. We want you to protect our labor market and our export and investment. So it's nice that you are. Your arguments are based on principles, but be pragmatic. Please be pragmatic as well. So they have to sometime really mingle among those rocks in Charybdis, and it's not easy. I would only express my admiration for those of them who are under pressure of their own business community. And still are, you know, openly protecting our values. In situation of Cold War, you mentioned Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Of course, it was quite specific moment because of the, among other things, because the Soviet Union was almost collapsing already. It was so corroded that it was really on the last stage of its existence. Now we have Russia, which was on the top, and it's a bit different. Russia was never so, and Russians were never so rich like they are today. They enjoy something what they never had in their history, from the materialistic point of view. I believe that once they are going to lose it, and once their living standard is going to be melting down, it could be the best ally for us in the West against some kind of imperialism, which I call Putinism.
Finally, I want to resist to have a little remark, a little opinionated remark. So it seems to me that the real leaders are born out of the crisis, out of the imminent threat, out of the danger. And look at Ukraine. Actually, Mr. Poroshenko and even Mr. Yatsenyuk seem to me quite leaders. They speak language which has a content. I understand it myself, what they want to say, which is not typical for the politicians these days. They are educated. They speak better English than 99% of Czech MPs. And they seem to me quite convincing. So this is just my little remark. I couldn't resist. So do other two panelists want to add something to it?
I would add two last names to the list or that great list of yours. I would add Karl Schwarzenberg, and I would add James Sher, a security expert from London. At least
Carl Bildt.
And Carl Bildt, yeah. And so there are great people around us. It's just the question whether they have the opportunity to expose themselves in the real life and under the real conditions. I would like to stress for the third time, the problem of EU is not the capacity. The capacity is here. The problem is the political will. The problem is putting the right issues on the agenda. The problem is focusing on the right issues. The EU is such a sophisticated and able machine that if it sets the right goal, it can achieve pretty much anything it wants. But the question is whether the EU is actually capable of putting the will into the right place.
Okay, so
I would like to point to one problem which democratic world faces from my point of view. This is a kind of gap. On one hand, we are facing strategic challenges such as, for example, international terrorism or militant Islam or authoritarian regimes such as Putin's is. And on the other hand, the European leaders, the leaders of democratic countries have 5 years term in their offices, you see. And there is a contradiction. You need a long-term strategy, strategic vision, and detailed written strategy, what to do and how to deal with that problem, solution of which may take decades, and you have 4 or 5 years term in the office. And this is a problem, and this is advance of the authoritarian type of leaders. For example, Putin may count for 20 years. Merkel can count for 4 years only. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to thank all the panelists, and I would like to thank the audience for the attention. And there will be a break for a coffee now, and next panel starts in 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.